Oh, gotcha. Woo, easy, easy, stay with me. Come on. Come here, you devil. Come here. No. Right. Damn it.
In March of 1800, in the remote plains of Venezuela, a group of native fishermen captured the world's most dangerous electric fish. Their target was a creature that could unleash 860 volts, enough to paralyze a man and stop his heart. For centuries, catching this animal was considered a suicide mission, but these fishermen had a secret. It wasn't a new net, a stronger line, or a faster spear. It was a herd of wild horses. This is the story of how they used living shields to disarm a biological taser, and how the scientific world laughed at the tale for 200 years, until one scientist proved the crazy story was true. 8 feet of black, sinuous muscle. A creature that is not a true eel, but a knife fish, a living relic from a forgotten branch of evolution. It has no dorsal fin, no scales. Its skin is a thick, slimy coat of darkness. Its eyes are tiny, almost useless in the muddy waters it calls home. It doesn't need to see. It senses the world in pulses of electricity. It hunts with an invisible weapon. Inside its body, 3 pairs of specialized organs, making up 80% of its length, act as biological batteries. Thousands of specialized cells, called electrocytes, stacked like coins in a roll, can discharge at once, unleashing a torrent of up to 860 volts and 1 ampere of current. It is a living high-voltage fence. A biological taser that can drop a full-grown man in an instant. A single shock can cause cardiac arrest. Multiple shocks can lead to respiratory failure. And if you are in the water, the paralysis is immediate. You can't move. You can't scream. You simply drown. This is the Electrophorus volti, the electric eel. For centuries, it was a creature of myth and terror in the llanos of South America, a monster that no fisherman dared to catch. Until Alexander von Humboldt, the great Prussian naturalist, arrived in Venezuela and demanded to see one for himself. In the spring of 1800, Alexander von Humboldt and his companion, the botanist Aimé Bonpland, were on a scientific expedition through the Spanish colonies of South America. They had spent months traveling up the Orinoco River, documenting plants, animals, and geological formations. Humboldt was a man obsessed with measurement. He measured the temperature of the air, the blueness of the sky, the chemical composition of rocks. And now he wanted to measure the electricity of the legendary electric eel. He arrived in the small town of Calabozo, in the heart of the Venezuelan plains, a region known for its vast grasslands, its seasonal floods, and its abundance of electric eels. Humboldt approached the local fishermen, members of the indigenous Guayqueries people, and offered them a handsome sum for a few live specimens. The fishermen refused. They looked at him as if he were insane. To them, the eel, or temblador as they called it, was not a fish to be caught. It was a spirit of the water, a demon to be avoided. They told him stories of men who had died from a single touch, of horses and cattle that had collapsed and drowned after stumbling into a pool filled with the creatures. But Humboldt was persistent. He was a man of the Enlightenment, a rationalist, a scientist. He did not believe in demons, he believed in electricity, and he was determined to get his eels. He doubled his offer, he tripled it. Finally, after days of negotiation, the fishermen relented. They would get him his eels, but not with nets or hooks. They would use a different method. A method, they warned him, that would be violent and dangerous. They would fish with horses. 2 days later, Humboldt and Bonpland were led to a muddy pool about 30 feet across and 5 feet deep. a stagnant body of water left behind by the receding floods of the wet season. The pool was teeming with electric eels trapped by the dry season. The fishermen, about 30 of them, then arrived with a herd of about 30 wild horses and mules, which they had rounded up from the surrounding savanna. The plan was as simple as it was brutal. They would force the horses into the pool. At first, the horses refused. They sensed the danger. They could smell the electricity in the air. But the fishermen were relentless. They surrounded the horses, shouting, waving palm fronds, cracking whips. They drove the terrified animals into the water. For a moment, there was a tense silence. The horses stood trembling in the muddy water, their eyes wide with fear. The surface of the pool was still. Nothing moved. Then the water exploded. The eels, disturbed from their muddy rest, rose to the surface. It was a vision from a nightmare. Dozens of them, black serpentine forms, their heads held high, their tiny eyes fixed on the massive, warm-blooded threats that had invaded their home. And then they attacked. The battle was chaotic. It was brutal. It was unlike anything Humboldt had ever witnessed. It was not a fight between predator and prey. It was a war between two different forms of energy. The kinetic energy of the horses, their powerful muscles, their panicked hooves, and the electrical energy of the eels, their invisible silent weapon. A horse screamed, a high, piercing sound of pure agony. An eel, over 5 feet long, had pressed itself against the horse's belly, its body rigid, its muscles contracted. It was discharging. 860 volts. The horse's legs buckled. It stumbled, its head sinking beneath the water. Another eel struck its flank. Then another. The horse convulsed, a massive, uncontrolled spasm of muscle and nerve. It went down, thrashing, and did not get up. Another horse, trying to scramble up the muddy bank, was met by a leaping eel. The creature launched itself out of the water, its chin pressed against the horse's leg, its body a living conductor. The horse shrieked and fell back into the pool. The fishermen, who had climbed into the overhanging trees, shouted and waved their reeds, forcing the horses back into the center of the pool, back into the kill zone. The scene was a maelstrom of violence. The water churned, thick with mud and blood. The air was filled with the sounds of screaming horses, shouting men, and a strange crackling hum, the sound of electricity discharging in water. Humboldt, watching from the safety of the bank, was both horrified and fascinated. He was a man of science, but he was also a man of feeling. He saw the cruelty, the suffering of the horses, but he also saw the incredible power of the eels, the raw, untamed force of nature. He watched as the eels coordinated their attacks. They seemed to swarm the largest horses, the ones that were thrashing the most. They would strike, discharge, and then retreat, only to be replaced by another eel. It was a relentless, strategic assault. The fight became a series of brutal cinematic cuts, a surge of black bodies. The water boils. A horse rears, its eyes white with terror. An eel leaps. A direct hit. 860 volts. The horse collapses, a dead weight. Another horse tries to run. It is met by a wall of eels. They press against its legs, its belly, its chest. The horse shudders. It groans. It falls. The fishermen watch. They wait. This is the price, the cost of catching a demon. For 5 minutes, the battle raged. 2 horses were dead, their bodies floating limply in the water. Several others had collapsed on the banks, their limbs twitching, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Humboldt thought more would be killed. He was about to call a halt to the slaughter, but then he noticed a change. The eel's attacks were becoming weaker. The furious, coordinated assaults were becoming sporadic, disorganized. The leaps were less frequent, less powerful. The great electric fish, the masters of the pool, were exhausted. They had spent their energy, their biological batteries drained by the constant discharging. They had won the battle, but they had lost the war. Now, the fishermen moved in. They waded into the pool, armed with small harpoons attached to long cords. The eels, now barely able to produce a weak shock, were easy prey. The fishermen speared 5 of them, pulling them onto the bank, their bodies still twitching, their electrical power spent. Humboldt had his specimens. The brutal, terrifying spectacle was over. He spent the next few hours dissecting the eels, studying their electrical organs, measuring the faint residual voltage. He was the first scientist to conduct a systematic study of the electric eel. His account of the fishing with horses, published in 1807, became one of the most famous stories in the history of natural science. It was a tale of adventure, of discovery, of the raw, untamed power of the natural world. But for the next 200 years, the scientific world was skeptical. The story was too dramatic, too violent, too unscientific. Many scientists dismissed it as an exaggeration, a poetically transfigured tale. The aggressive, leaping behavior of the eels, in particular, was seen as fantasy. No one had ever reported seeing an eel leap from the water to attack a threat. The story of the battle with the horses was relegated to the footnotes of history, a curious anecdote from a more romantic, less rigorous era of science. Until 2016, the year a scientist at Vanderbilt University named Kenneth Catania decided to recreate Humboldt's experiment, not with horses, but with a plastic alligator head and a conductive metal rod. Kenneth Catania was a neurobiologist who had been studying the sensory world of strange animals for years. He had studied the star-nosed mole, the tentacled snake, and the water shrew. In 2012, he turned his attention to the electric eel. He was fascinated by their ability to generate and sense electricity. He wanted to understand how they used their electrical powers to hunt and navigate. Like generations of scientists before him, he was familiar with Humboldt's story. And like them, he was skeptical. But he was also curious. Was it possible that there was some truth to the old tale? Was it possible that eels could, under certain circumstances, behave in the aggressive leaping manner that Humboldt had described? He began his experiments by studying the eel's defensive behavior. He used a metal-rimmed net to transfer eels from their home tank to an experimental chamber. And he immediately noticed something strange. When the net approached, the eels would often switch from a retreat to an explosive attack. They would swim rapidly toward the net, follow the metal rim to the point where it exited the water, and then leap upward along the rim and handle, pressing their chin against the metal while discharging high-voltage volleys. Catania was, in his own words, literally and figuratively shocked. This was the behavior that Humboldt had described: the leaping attack, the direct targeted discharge of electricity. It wasn't a myth, it was real. He decided to investigate further. He designed a series of experiments to measure the voltage and current delivered during these leaping attacks. He used a split conductive rod with one segment in the water and the other in the air, and measured the voltage between the two segments as the eel ascended. The results were astounding. The higher the eel leaped, the more voltage was delivered to the rod. The eel was essentially short-circuiting its own electrical organ through the threat, concentrating its full power on the target. Catania realized that this behavior was a brilliant defensive strategy, likely evolved to deal with terrestrial or semi-aquatic predators during the Amazonian dry season, when eels can be trapped in small, shallow pools, vulnerable to attack from animals like jaguars or large wading birds. By leaping out of the water, the eel could deliver a much more powerful shock directly to the predator, a shock that would not be dissipated by the surrounding water. It was a perfect explanation for Humboldt's story. The horses, with their large, conductive bodies, were the perfect targets. The eels, trapped in the muddy pool, felt threatened and launched their leaping attacks, pressing themselves against the horses' legs and bellies, delivering their full 860-volt charge. The horses, in their panic, would have thrashed and stamped, creating more disturbance, provoking more attacks. It was a feedback loop of terror and electricity. Catania's research, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2016, was a landmark. It was a vindication of Humboldt. It was a validation of the traditional knowledge of the Guayqueries fishermen. It was a reminder that science, for all its power, can sometimes be blind to the knowledge that has been accumulated over thousands of years of careful observation and lived experience. The story of the fishing with horses was not a poetically transfigured tale. It was a precise, accurate description of a sophisticated and brutal survival strategy. The native fishermen of Venezuela were not savages. They were brilliant naturalists. They understood the behavior of the electric eel in a way that no scientist had for 200 years. They knew that the eels were most dangerous when they were fresh. They knew that they could be exhausted. And they knew that the best way to exhaust them was to present them with a large, threatening target that they could not ignore. The horses were not just bait. They were a biological shield, a tool for disarming a living weapon. The method was cruel, yes, but it was also effective. And it was based on a profound understanding of the animal's behavior, an understanding that was lost to science for 2 centuries, only to be rediscovered by a curious neurobiologist with a plastic alligator head and a willingness to believe that an old story might be true. Let's delve deeper into the science of this incredible encounter. The key to the Guayqueries method was their understanding of the eel's energy limitations. An electric eel's discharge is a massive expenditure of energy. The electrocytes, the specialized cells that generate the shock, function like tiny biological capacitors. They are charged by a complex metabolic process, and once they are discharged, they need time to recharge. The Guayqueries knew this instinctively. They knew that if they could force the eels to discharge repeatedly, they would eventually run out of power. The horses were the perfect tool for this. A large, warm-blooded animal presents a massive, conductive target. The eels, perceiving a major threat, would unleash their most powerful high-voltage volleys. But each volley would drain their energy reserves. The first horse to enter the pool would have faced the full, terrifying power of the eels. But by the time the 30th horse was in the water, the eels would have been significantly weakened. It was a war of attrition, and the Guayqueries had stacked the odds in their favor. Catania's research provided the modern scientific explanation for this. He showed that the leaping attack is the eel's most powerful weapon, but also its most costly. By leaping from the water, the eel creates a direct circuit between its electrical organ and the threat, bypassing the resistance of the water. This delivers a much more powerful shock to the target, but it also drains the eel's energy much more quickly. The Guayqueries method forced the eels into this high-energy attack mode, accelerating their exhaustion. The story also reveals a sophisticated understanding of animal behavior. The fishermen didn't just throw the horses into the pool and hope for the best. They managed the encounter with a level of control that is remarkable. They used noise and threats to keep the horses in the water, ensuring that they remained as targets for the eels. They climbed into the trees not just for safety, but to get a better vantage point, to direct the chaos. They were conductors of an orchestra of violence, and the music they were making was the sound of a living weapon being disarmed. This level of ecological knowledge is not unique to the Guayqueries. Indigenous communities around the world have developed similarly sophisticated methods for interacting with their environments. From the fire-stick farming of Australian Aborigines to the complex agroforestry systems of the Amazon, traditional ecological knowledge represents a vast and largely untapped library of sustainable living practices. The story of the fishing with horses is a powerful reminder that we ignore this knowledge at our peril. In the aftermath of Catania's discovery, there has been a renewed interest in Humboldt's work. Historians of science are re-examining his journals, not as quaint travelogues, but as valuable scientific documents. They are recognizing that Humboldt was not just a collector of facts, but a brilliant synthesizer, a man who understood that nature was a complex, interconnected system. He was one of the first scientists to think in terms of ecology, to see the relationships between organisms and their environment. His account of the battle with the eels is a perfect example of this. He didn't just describe the eels and the horses, he described the entire scene, the muddy pool, the dry season, the shouting fishermen, the overhanging trees. He understood that the event was not just about the animals, but about the entire ecosystem, including the humans who were a part of it. This holistic perspective is something that modern science is only just beginning to rediscover. For too long, science has been dominated by a reductionist approach, a tendency to break things down into their smallest components, to study them in isolation. This approach has been incredibly powerful, but it has also led to a fragmented and incomplete understanding of the world. The story of the fishing with horses is a powerful argument for a more integrated, more ecological approach to science, one that recognizes that the whole is always greater than the sum of its parts. And what of the horses? Their sacrifice was not in vain. The eels that Humboldt collected provided the first anatomical specimens for the study of bioelectricity. They helped to lay the foundation for the field of electrophysiology, the study of the electrical properties of living cells. The work of scientists like Luigi Galvani and Alessandro Volta, the pioneers of electricity, was directly influenced by the reports of electric fish coming back from the New World. The dead horses in that muddy pool in Venezuela are a part of a long and complex story that leads directly to the battery in your phone, the electrical grid that powers your home, and our modern understanding of the nervous system. It is a story that is full of contradictions. It is a story of cruelty and discovery, of tradition and innovation, of myth and science. But above all, it is a story about the enduring power of observation. The Guayqueries fishermen observed the eels for generations, and from their observations, they developed a powerful and effective technology. Humboldt observed the fishermen, and from his observations, he wrote a story that would inspire and provoke scientists for centuries. Catania observed the eels in his lab, and from his observations, he solved a 200-year-old mystery. The story of the fishing with horses is a testament to the simple, profound act of paying attention. It is a reminder that the world is full of wonders and that the key to unlocking them is to look, to listen, and to believe that even the craziest stories might be true. In the end, the secret of the Guayqueries was not a trick. It was a deep, hard-won knowledge of the natural world. It was an understanding of the delicate balance between predator and prey, between energy and exhaustion, between life and death. It was a knowledge that was written not in books, but in the land, in the water, and in the stories passed down from one generation to the next. And it is a knowledge that we are only just beginning to appreciate. Let's explore the broader implications of this story. The validation of Humboldt's account has had a ripple effect across multiple scientific disciplines. In the field of animal behavior, it has forced a reevaluation of what we thought we knew about the capabilities of electric fish. The leaping attack is a highly complex and specialized behavior, suggesting a level of cognitive sophistication that was previously not attributed to these animals. It is not just a simple reflex. It is a targeted, strategic maneuver, a calculated use of force. This has led to a new wave of research into the cognitive abilities of fish, a field that has long been neglected. In the field of evolutionary biology, the story of the fishing with horses provides a fascinating case study of coevolution. The eels evolved their powerful shock as a defense against predators. But the guicaries, as predators themselves, evolved a cultural adaptation, the use of horses, as shields, to overcome this defense. This is a beautiful example of how human culture can be a powerful evolutionary force, shaping the behavior and even the genetics of other species. It is a reminder that we are not separate from nature, but an integral part of it, locked in a complex dance of adaptation and counter-adaptation. In the field of conservation, the story has become a powerful symbol of the importance of traditional ecological knowledge. For decades, conservation efforts have been dominated by a top-down, Western-centric approach. Scientists from developed countries would come to developing countries, armed with their GPS collars and their statistical models, and tell the local people how to manage their resources. The story of the fishing with horses has helped to challenge this paradigm. It has shown that indigenous communities often have a much deeper and more nuanced understanding of their local ecosystems than any outside expert. It has led to a new model of conservation, one that is based on partnership, on respect, and on the co-creation of knowledge. And in the field of history of science, the story has forced a re-examination of the legacy of explorers like Humboldt. For a long time, these figures were seen as heroic, solitary geniuses, venturing into the wilderness to discover the secrets of nature. But the story of the fishing with horses reminds us that they were not alone. They were guided by local experts, by indigenous knowledge holders who shared their wisdom and their skills. Humboldt's genius was not just in his ability to observe and measure, but in his willingness to listen, to learn from the people he encountered. He was a bridge between two worlds, a conduit for the flow of knowledge from the Amazon to the academies of Europe. This story is also a powerful reminder of the ethical complexities of scientific research. The fishing with horses was a brutal and violent event. 2 horses died, and many others were injured. From a modern perspective, it is easy to condemn this as animal cruelty. But we must also remember the context. For the guicaries, this was a matter of survival. The eels were a valuable resource, and this was the only safe way to obtain them. For Humboldt, it was a necessary evil, a price to be paid for the advancement of knowledge. The story forces us to confront difficult questions about the ethics of our interactions with the natural world. What is the price of knowledge? When is it acceptable to harm animals in the pursuit of science? There are no easy answers to these questions, but the story of the fishing with horses forces us to ask them. In the end, the story of the fishing with horses is more than just a story about electric eels and horses. It is a story about the nature of knowledge, the clash of cultures, and the complex and often brutal relationship between humans and the natural world. It is a story that has been told and retold for over 200 years, and it is a story that will continue to fascinate and provoke us for many years to come. It is a story that reminds us that the world is a strange and wonderful place, full of creatures that defy our expectations and stories that challenge our assumptions. And it is a story that proves, once and for all, that sometimes the craziest stories are the ones that are the most true. The image of those leaping eels, their bodies crackling with electricity, is an image of nature at its most raw, its most powerful, its most terrifying. But it is also an image of hope. It is a reminder that even in our modern technological world, there are still secrets to be discovered, still mysteries to be solved, and that sometimes the best way to find them is to follow the footsteps of an old explorer into a muddy pool in the heart of the Amazon and to watch the battle unfold. It is a story that will forever be burned into the history of science, a testament to the raw power of nature and to the enduring ingenuity of the human spirit. And it is a reminder that even in our modern world, there are still demons in the water. And sometimes the only way to catch them is with a herd of wild horses. A herd of wild horses. The legacy of Humboldt's encounter extends far beyond the immediate scientific discoveries. In the decades following his expedition, the electric eel became a symbol of the exotic and dangerous nature of the New World. Artists and illustrators created dramatic depictions of the battle with the horses, images that were reproduced in scientific journals, popular magazines, and children's books. These illustrations, while often exaggerated, help to cement the eel's place in the popular imagination as one of the most fearsome creatures on Earth. One of the most famous illustrations was created by Robert H. Schomburg in 1843 as the frontispiece for his book, The Fishes of Guyana. The image shows a chaotic scene of horses and eels locked in combat, with fishermen watching from the trees. It is a powerful and evocative image, one that captures the violence and drama of Humboldt's account. This illustration was widely reproduced and became the definitive visual representation of the fishing with horses for over a century. But the story of the electric eel is not just a story of violence and danger, it is also a story of scientific wonder. The eel's ability to generate electricity fascinated scientists from the very beginning. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, electricity was still a mysterious and poorly understood force. Scientists like Luigi Galvani and Alessandro Volta were just beginning to explore the relationship between electricity and life. The electric eel, with its ability to generate powerful shocks, was a living laboratory, a natural experiment that could help unlock the secrets of bioelectricity. Humboldt's specimens were some of the first to be studied in detail by European scientists. They were dissected, their electrical organs examined under microscopes, their anatomy compared to other fish. This research laid the foundation for the modern understanding of how electric organs work. Scientists discovered that the eel's electrical organs are made up of thousands of specialized cells called electrocytes, which are modified muscle cells that have lost their ability to contract but have gained the ability to generate an electrical potential. When these cells discharge simultaneously, they create a powerful electric shock. The discovery of the electrocyte was a major breakthrough in the field of electrophysiology. It showed that electricity was not just a physical force, but a biological one as well. It demonstrated that living cells could generate and control electrical currents, a finding that would eventually lead to our modern understanding of how the nervous system works. The electric eel, once a creature of myth and terror, became a model organism for the study of bioelectricity. In the 20th century, research on electric eels continued to yield important discoveries. Scientists learned that eels use their electrical abilities for navigation and communication, sensing electrical fields generated by other organisms to hunt in complete darkness. In the 1950s, researchers at the Marine Biological Laboratory in Woods Hole used electric eels to study nerve impulse transmission, developing detailed models of how nerve cells generate electrical signals. This research was instrumental in modern neuroscience and earned several researchers the Nobel Prize. But despite all this research, the leaping attack behavior described by Humboldt remained a mystery. No one had ever observed it in a laboratory setting. No one had been able to replicate it. And so, for 200 years, it remained a footnote, a curious anecdote from a bygone era. Until Kenneth Catania came along. Catania's work was not just a validation of Humboldt's account, it was a revelation. It showed that the electric eel was capable of far more sophisticated and strategic behavior than anyone had imagined. The leaping attack is not a simple reflex. It is a complex, coordinated maneuver that requires the eel to assess the threat, calculate the optimal angle of attack, and execute a precise leap that brings its chin into contact with the target at exactly the right moment. This level of cognitive sophistication suggests that electric eels have a much more complex nervous system than previously thought. It raises questions about their intelligence, their ability to learn, their capacity for problem solving. It opens up new avenues of research into the evolution of cognition in fish, a field that has long been neglected because of the assumption that fish are simple, instinct-driven creatures. Catania's research also had practical implications. By understanding how the eel's leaping attack works, scientists can design better safety protocols for handling these animals in research settings. They can develop more effective methods for capturing and relocating eels in the wild. And they can create educational programs that teach people in eel habitats how to avoid dangerous encounters. But perhaps the most important legacy of Catania's work is the message it sends about the value of curiosity and open-mindedness in science. For 200 years, scientists dismissed Humboldt's account because it didn't fit with their preconceived notions of how eels should behave. They were so convinced that they knew everything there was to know about electric eels that they couldn't imagine that an old story from a 19th century explorer might contain valuable scientific information. Catania's willingness to take the story seriously, to test it, to believe that it might be true, led to one of the most important discoveries in the field of animal behavior in recent decades. It is a powerful reminder that science is not just about what we know, but also about what we don't know. It is about being open to new ideas, new perspectives, new ways of seeing the world. It is about being willing to challenge our assumptions and to follow the evidence wherever it leads. The story of the fishing with horses also has important implications for the field of ethnobiology, the study of the relationship between humans and the natural world. For too long, Western science has treated traditional ecological knowledge as a curiosity, a collection of folk beliefs and superstitions that might be interesting from an anthropological perspective, but have no real scientific value. The story of the fishing with horses challenges this view. It shows that indigenous communities often have a deep and sophisticated understanding of their local ecosystems, an understanding that is based on centuries of careful observation and experimentation. The Guaycarese fishermen who showed Humboldt the fishing with horses were not primitive savages. They were skilled naturalists who had developed a highly effective technology for capturing one of the most dangerous animals in their environment. Their knowledge was not based on superstition or magic. It was based on a deep understanding of the eel's behavior, its energy limitations, its defensive strategies. It was, in every sense of the word, scientific knowledge. This recognition has led to a growing movement within the scientific community to engage more seriously with traditional ecological knowledge. Researchers are now working with indigenous communities to document their knowledge systems, to learn from their practices, and to incorporate their insights into modern conservation and management strategies. This is not just a matter of political correctness or cultural sensitivity. It is a matter of good science. Traditional ecological knowledge represents a vast and largely untapped resource, a library of information about the natural world that has been accumulated over thousands of years of lived experience. The story of the fishing with horses is also a powerful example of the importance of interdisciplinary research. Humboldt was not just a naturalist. He was also a geographer, a geologist, a meteorologist, an ethnographer. He understood that to truly understand the natural world, you need to look at it from multiple perspectives, to integrate knowledge from multiple disciplines. His account of the fishing with horses is not just a description of an animal behavior. It is a description of an entire ecosystem, including the physical environment, the animals, the plants, and the humans who are a part of it. This holistic, interdisciplinary approach is something that modern science is only just beginning to rediscover. For too long, science has been fragmented into narrow specialties, with researchers working in isolation, speaking different languages, using different methods. This has led to a fragmented and incomplete understanding of the world. The story of the fishing with horses is a powerful argument for a more integrated, more collaborative approach to science, one that brings together researchers from different disciplines to tackle complex problems. And what of the electric eel today? The species is not currently endangered, but it faces growing threats from habitat loss, pollution, and overfishing. The Amazon basin, where the eel is most abundant, is under increasing pressure from deforestation, dam construction, and agricultural expansion. The muddy pools and slow-moving rivers that the eel depends on are disappearing at an alarming rate. Conservation efforts are underway, but they face significant challenges. The electric eel is a difficult animal to study in the wild. It is elusive, nocturnal, and dangerous. Traditional survey methods like netting and electrofishing are ineffective and often harmful to the animals. New, non-invasive methods are needed, methods that can provide information about eel populations without disturbing them. One promising approach is the use of environmental DNA, or eDNA. This technique involves collecting water samples from eel habitats and analyzing them for traces of eel DNA. By detecting the presence of eel DNA in the water, researchers can determine whether eels are present in a given area without having to capture or even see them. This method is still in its early stages, but it has the potential to revolutionize eel conservation by providing a safe, non-invasive way to monitor populations. Another promising approach is the use of acoustic telemetry. This involves capturing eels, implanting them with small acoustic transmitters, and then releasing them back into the wild. The transmitters emit a unique acoustic signal that can be detected by underwater receivers placed throughout the eel's habitat. By tracking the movements of tagged eels, researchers can learn about their behavior, their habitat use, and their migration patterns. This information is crucial for developing effective conservation strategies. But technology alone is not enough. Effective conservation requires the active participation of local communities, the people who live in eel habitats and who depend on the river for their livelihoods. This means working with communities to develop sustainable fishing practices, to protect critical habitats, and to educate people about the importance of conserving these incredible animals. The story of the fishing with horses provides a powerful model for this kind of community-based conservation. The Guaycarese fishermen were not enemies of the eel. They were stewards of the eel, managing it as a valuable resource. Their method, while brutal by modern standards, was sustainable. They only took what they needed, and they did so in a way that did not deplete the population. This is the kind of relationship that we need to cultivate if we are to ensure the survival of the electric eel and the countless other species that depend on the Amazon. In recent years, there has been a growing recognition of the importance of indigenous land rights for conservation. Studies have shown that indigenous managed lands often have higher biodiversity and lower rates of deforestation than lands managed by governments or private entities. This is because indigenous communities have a vested interest in the long-term health of their ecosystems. They depend on the land and the water for their survival, and they have developed sustainable practices that allow them to coexist with nature. The story of the fishing with horses is a powerful argument for supporting indigenous land rights and for recognizing the value of traditional ecological knowledge. It shows that indigenous communities are not obstacles to conservation, but essential partners. They have the knowledge, the skills, and the motivation to protect the natural world. What they often lack is the political power and the economic resources to do so. By supporting indigenous communities, by respecting their rights, and by learning from their knowledge, we can create a more effective and more just approach to conservation. The electric eel, that living battery, that creature of myth and science, stands as a symbol of the complex and often contradictory relationship between humans and the natural world. It is a creature that inspires both fear and fascination, a creature that has been both exploited and celebrated, a creature that has taught us profound lessons about the nature of life, the power of electricity, and the importance of respecting the knowledge of those who have lived in harmony with nature for thousands of years. The image of those leaping eels, their bodies crackling with electricity, their ancient fury directed at the terrified horses, is an image that will forever be burned into the history of science. It is a testament to the raw power of nature and to the enduring ingenuity of the human spirit. And it is a reminder that even in our modern world, there are still demons in the water. And sometimes the only way to catch them is with a herd of wild horses.